You can help this podcast by making your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon and make that your bookmark for future purchases. We'll then get a percentage of what you spend. It costs you nothing extra and helps us cover web hosting and the other costs of presenting this show every week.
This is Kumar.
This is Dana.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Kumar in Melbourne, Dana in Shizuoka. Today we're going to talk about Dan Clowes' Patience. Once again, it came out a year ago. I think it's March 2016 is the date on the inside. And as always on the show, we're late getting to it. That's par for the course. I actually bought it at San Diego Comic Con, so I had it even for 6 months, and I'm only just getting around to it. But anyway, you ended up with a copy of this as well.
Yep.
Somehow,
I picked it up last summer when I was home in Canada.
Right. And was this the usual thing where you just walked into the shop and you said recommend something and they recommended it, or how did you end up with it?
Something like that. I think, it was probably recommended, although in this case, I might have actually seen it on the shelf, and I read what's it called, the I'm gonna butcher the name, also by Clowes, the Iron Glove in a Velvet Casting,
like a velvet glove cast in iron.
Yeah, we'll go with that.
Yeah
Exactly, like a glove of velvet iron cast. Yeah. Anyway, enough of that foolishness. So I had bought that a few years ago on a similar trip back home to Canada, and I really enjoyed that one. Yeah. And so when I saw this one, this would have been fairly new last June when I saw it on the show. So I sort of asked about it. I was like, is it any good? And the guy's like, it's not quite as surreal as a velvet glove, but well, I think the thing with like a velvet glove cast in iron is it's much more. I don't know. This one definitely is kind of, there's science fiction reality, whereas I think like a velvet glove cast in iron is more.
It's non-linear
surrealism.
Yeah. It's kind of non-linear, and there's magic realism in it. Well, it's beyond that. Yeah. But that's interesting because they're kind of at opposite ends. Because I think Velvet Glove was the first full-length book that came out of 8-Ball, which was.
Then I think Clowes' first graphic novel.
Yeah. I think it was his first, and I think I don't know which came, if Ghost World or David Boring came after that, but it's the opposite end of the spectrum. So that's kind of interesting. So you haven't read any of the middle ones?
I don't think so. I saw the film Ghost World actually with you way back in the day. But I haven't actually read any other Daniel Clowes.
Okay, that's interesting.
Clowes? What's his name? Clowes?
I always say Clowes.
Clowes.
Dan Clowes.
All right, we'll go with that.
I don't know if it's right.
Either.
But what I found is that on most podcasts, at least every person will be assigned one pronunciation so that somebody will be getting it right. So maybe we should just stick with that strategy.
All right.
Okay, so this is speaking about it being at the opposite end, it's kind of a major release, because it's a full-length, 200-page graphic novel. It was not serialized. I think the last, Mr. Wonderful came out before this, and that was serialized in, the New York Times or something. And there was Wilson, which was shorter than this. And he's had some hardcovers, which are, the Ray. There was a superhero one. I think it was called the Ray.
The Death Ray.
Death Ray, and then there was something Haven. It's about the town, and it's kind of a murder mystery thing. Those are both reformatted issues of 8-Ball into little mini hardcovers. So there hasn't really been a super full length, except for and Wilson was a standalone, like it wasn't serialized anywhere, I think. And this is kind of and when you think about it, I don't think there are any other, except for Wilson. I think everything was serialized somewhere else, or in 8-Ball, or in some shorter form. So it's kind of a, major release from a major cartoonist. So it's kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
When it came out. Okay, so it's, as I think we mentioned, it's kind of a time travel story. It's very psychedelic. It opens almost like your bog standard, what you'd expect from Dan Clowes, which is, there's a couple, and in the opening pages, we discover that the wife, Patience, has become pregnant, and the husband, Jack, has no job, but he has been lying about that to Patience, and we get a lot of his internal monologue and how much of a heel he feels like for lying about it and not having a job and what a loser he is, and he's got to take care of this baby and take care of Patience. And then shortly within the first couple of, opening pages, he comes home and finds her murdered. And, they arrest him for it, and then they realize it's not him. They let him go. He goes on a quest to find the real killer. And then suddenly it flashes forward to 2029. And he's still looking for the killer. And he seems to always come up to leads, and you think he always gets his lead. He gets a name, and it's like, okay, it's this guy. And you think it's gonna kind of work through like a conventional mystery story, but almost immediately in the following panel, it's like that lead didn't pan out. So it just keeps reversing itself. So anyway, and then finally he stumbles across this time travel thing. He's able to time travel. So he's going to travel back in time and try to prevent the murder so that he will have a normal life with a teenage son in 2029.
Yeah.
And that's the most basic premise of it.
Yep.
Okay, but
pretty accurate.
Yeah, but there's a lot of messier stuff going on. Like he ends up. So first, the book starts in 2012. He goes back to 2006. Now they've been together for 6 years, I think he says initially. And so he's gone back to just before they got together. And he doesn't really know anything about Patience's past. She has kept that secret from him. And he doesn't really realize, and she thinks her own past was really messed up, which it was, which we discover, like her former boyfriends and crazy things which happened to her. And he starts to figure this out. Now, he describes himself as a ghost. He's supposed to be meaning that he's supposed to not interfere in any way. He's just there to observe, because the point is, whatever happened to her in the past, she ended up with him anyway. So it doesn't matter how bad her ex-boyfriends were or whatever crap happened to her. He's just got to let that stuff slide and just let time. He just needs to figure out who killed her. Just watch and try to figure that out. And then when the day comes when she's about to be killed, he needs to intervene and stop that from happening. But this guy becomes so obsessed, he can't stop himself from interfering. And he continually interferes, like, she gets sexually assaulted in the woods, and he goes and beats up the guy that did it. And then he's like, oh shit, like I shouldn't have done that, and now I have to just stay in the woods for the rest of the time. I just can't do anything else. But immediately he goes on and does the next thing. Like he just can't, he has this compulsion, he can't stop himself from interfering all the time, and he keeps screwing stuff up. So he thinks, but then, it's a time travel story, so, well, maybe all his screw-ups were what actually happened in the past. So it kind of goes on. It's kind of this constant tug of war, I guess, and the tug of war is flipped within one panel and the next. Like, there's one panel where he says, I really screwed up this time. I just gotta go stay in the woods for the next 3 weeks and not do anything. And literally in the next panel, he's thinking about, of course I'd kill Hitler's mother. And he comes up with this idea to, like within a panel, he's like, I've changed my mind. I'm going to go kill this baby or whatever. Yeah. I don't know. The second time through, I find myself, I was actually laughing at these incidents every time I find myself laughing at him.
He certainly is a bit of a fool, and throughout it, you're kind of like, it's this guy. I've got to go kill this guy. Oh, it's this. I don't know if he changes who he. I think he pretty much thinks it's one guy or one or two guys maybe the whole time. But he's just. He doesn't really have any proof. He's just like, this guy's obviously her
he's
asshole
he's
boyfriend.
A scumbag.
So
Yeah.
This is obviously the guy who did it.
Yeah.
And right all the way through, he's kind of very, he's like half cocked and impulsive and kind of a bit of a fool, really.
Yeah. Totally. But he also has this. He's become this kind of tough guy. Like, he takes on this. I don't know if he takes on or he actually has this hard-boiled crime noir persona. And before he was kind of a milquetoast at the start. He was like, handing out flyers to some porn XXX store or something. We don't know what the flyers are for, but something like that. And, he's just like a sad sack, and like, what am I going to do with my life? And then suddenly by 2029, he's like, beating up Johns, like he meets this hooker on the street and he's beating up this John, and, the dialogue that comes out of him is hilarious. Like, there's one stage where he ends up he screws up and ends up back in 1985, and he shows up at this restaurant and, or at a cafe or something, and he tries to pay with this new $5 note, and the guy's like, hey, what the hell is this? And he says, oops, sorry, and the guy's like, the guy in the restaurant's like, get out of here before I call the cops, and he says, and then there's a caption of dialogue, a narrative caption where he says, obviously I need to get my head on straight, focus my attention on the task at hand. That poor sucker doesn't know how close I came to broiling his ass. And I'm like, why is he going to broil the ass of this guy who called him using the wrong $5 note? You know what I mean? Like, he's constantly talking about he's going to beat the hell out of this guy or that guy or whatever. And he does, like, he often does blow people's faces off and,
Yep.
God, there was a scene where he's trying to get into a club, which was really funny too, where he's, the bouncer at the door is like, he says, the bouncer's like, can I help you? And he's like, yeah, let me in. The bouncer says, why? And Jack says, because I'm from the future and I'll incinerate your children. And the bouncer says, right answer, and lets him in. So I don't know if he's really, he is a tough guy, but he's a screwball too. Like, he can't really he can't control his impulses, I guess.
No.
Which maybe should, on the flip side of that is patience. And I don't know if we really know much about her. Because he puts her on a pedestal. Like, the only we get a lot of, at least for, the first 100 pages, he's describing her and how perfect she is and how wonderful she is and whatever I wish she'd have told me this stuff because I would have forgiven her in an instant. Doesn't she realize how glorious she is, etc., etc. Whereas she is, in a typical Dan Clowes character fashion, she's full of self-doubt and self-loathing because of what other people have done to her. And I think there is a shift where we do get some of her interior monologue. Later on.
The last, I think it's in the last when he goes, well, I don't know. So they go back to 2012, I guess. And that was quite confusing. At first I was kind of like, this is weird. But then I realized, that's her thoughts.
Yeah, she has a slightly different color of narrative captions. Like, it's a pale yellow instead of white. But we get a little bit of her dialogue, but it's mostly, almost like when he's listening into her and stuff, it's almost always about her scummy boyfriends or whatever, or how she's trying to get away from these guys. So, the book's called Patience, but I don't really know if it's about her in a way. I don't know. She's distant. You know what I mean? Like I didn't feel like I really. Well, I guess she's only thinking about guys because that's what has dominated her life, is the way these guys, including Jack, have they've kind of yoked her life so that she has no agency. When she does, like, the only reason she's able to leave town is because future Jack has given her $10,000.
Yeah.
So she's kind of this trapped figure, I guess.
I feel like we get more about her. Well, I guess it's her background. Like when he first goes back to 2006, we get a lot of sort of, like, I think she was in school or something, and she goes back home, and she ends up working in a restaurant, and everybody thinks she's all uppity and stuff because she'd gone to school or whatever.
Right.
Kind of typical
small
town stuff. But
she has kind of reputation, undeserved reputation for being kind of like redneck or white trash, or being kind of a wild child, which she seems to think is undeserved. Maybe only because her boyfriend was Adam, who was this guy who ended up actually going to jail.
Yeah, and then when she comes back, she's kind of, people in her town are kind of thinking she's a little bit snobby, or she's too good for them now because she went away to school, kind of thing.
Right.
But yeah, so we do get quite a bit. I feel we get quite a bit about her just in those two or three sort of sections, especially in the therapy scenes at near the end of the book. So yeah, I think we get enough to kind of develop her as a character, and her dialogue with Jack and stuff. Like, it didn't feel like she was like a placeholder or something. You know, she felt like she was as much of a developed character as Jack, and in many ways probably just a much more interesting person.
Yeah.
You know,
for sure. Because
character or not, but
because Jack is a typical Dan Clowes self-obsessed male. Like, that character appears over and over again.
Right, yeah.
And it's very interesting, too, that almost every woman he encounters looks just like Patience. And that's not because of the way Daniel Clowes draws. It's like a deliberate thing. Like, he picks up this prostitute in 2029 who's got blue skin, but she effectively looks like Patience. And then when he goes back to 1985, when he was a little kid, he knocks on the door of his own house, and his mother comes out, and she looks like an older Patience.
Exactly like her, yeah.
And he goes into that club, and this girl who tries to sell him drugs shows up, and she's another Patience look-alike as well. So it's almost there's a suggestion that the time travel might have messed up his head. And I don't know if we're seeing something through that filter, but I felt like there was a layer there of there's something going on. Like there were many layers. I don't know where. Okay, this book is. Let's lay it out on the table. It's not Clowes' best. And I read it twice, and I feel like maybe do I need to read it a couple more times is there something happening? Or, what is the authorial intention of the book? Like, of course we don't know, but was he just trying to write a science fiction book? And if we read it as a science fiction book, does it hold up? Or was he trying to go deeper? Like, the thing I always have with science fiction is, why is it science fiction? And you and I consume a lot of science fiction.
Yeah.
So, we're coming in it from that angle as well. And, there's nothing in here science fiction-y that is particularly new, I don't think. Like, we've seen all the time travel paradoxes before.
Yeah. Although it is kind of interesting as a side note, he does kind of talk, he mentions them a few times.
Yeah,
Jack
almost too much.
Like, geez, I wonder if I'm gonna meet myself, like if we're gonna explode, or like he kind of has these little offhand comments a few times about things like that. But that really never comes into play
Right.
beyond sort of Jack's thoughts.
Right, and he says at least 3 times he says, "I'm sick of this science fiction bullshit," or something to that effect. And I kind of felt like maybe Dan Clowes didn't care about the science fiction aspect of it, and he was going for something else. There was an interesting thing to me was I was like around the halfway through mark, I was like, oh, he's going to be the one that ends up killing her. And I'm like, Dan Clowes has to know, like, this is being projected 100 pages before the ending. Yeah. And that's not what happened. And he even says it out loud at one stage. He says, oh, I have considered that I might be the one to end up killing her, so I'm staying the hell away.
Right,
So he has actually thought about that. And interestingly, the ending, it did not end the way I thought it would.
Yeah.
Based on the way things played out and history following a certain course, I was like, oh, I really didn't see that coming.
Go
ahead.
I was just going to say, going back to your sort of point, okay, it's not Clowes' best work. Sort of coming into this podcast, I was considering asking you, it's like, all right, sell me on this book. Because I was, in a lot of ways, left, and a lot of things you just said about, is there more depth here? Is there something more going on? I didn't feel that there was anything kind of pulling at those thoughts as I was reading. I didn't feel that there's something here. Let me go back and look at that. Is there something? I never felt that there was a whole lot more. And perhaps that's just I've become a lazy reader in my old age. But I was going to ask you, it's like, okay, come on, because I was assuming that Kumar is going to be raving about this brilliant masterpiece, and I want him to open my eyes to the genius. But it sounds like you kind of had a similar feeling.
It's not a masterpiece because I think I don't know. Okay, well, as I was saying before about why is it science fiction, this is something that struck me about, I watched one episode of Firefly.
Yep.
And everybody loves that show, but I watched one episode and I was like, why is this set in space? Because it was, to me, it was just a Western. And you might as well just make a Western, you know what I mean? Adding ray guns did not add any depth or theme to it. Now, I've only seen the first episode, so...
You have to watch more of it.
Right, okay. So, this is a thing. My thing is, if something science fiction has to be about the present, but it's got to add a dimension to, it has to illuminate the present in a way that is not illuminated without those science fiction elements. Now, here we have a story about a guy who puts a woman on a pedestal and only learns about her past after she's dead.
Yeah.
Could that have been done without the time travel stuff? Yes.
Yep.
Did he just want to do a time travel story, and did he not really care about that whole aspect of discovering her past? Was it more about this guy and his bumbling attempts to save her? Maybe so, but it's still don't know what that science fiction dimension is adding to it. I think that I feel like it's not carving deep enough on any. It's going in two different directions. It's going in a science fiction-y thing, and it's going in this kind of Dan Clowes character study way, and neither of them are getting the attention that would be more rewarding for the reader.
Yeah.
If you know
I would completely agree with that. There's really there's nothing about the story that seems to illuminate our present situation in society or in the world or whatever.
Yeah.
Which, as you said, science fiction is illuminating the present by, introducing speculative technology or situations or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So,
it doesn't
really do that. Yeah, good science fiction.
Coming up, the ending, in as spoiler-free a way as possible. Also, discussion of the art and the relevance of mental health to this story. But first, help Deconstructing Comics, Critiquing Comics, and To the Bat Poles move up to bigger and better things. Pledge a few bucks a month via Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics. Or you can make a one-time donation via PayPal. Send it to donate@deconstructingcomics.com.
This is an imaginary podcast, which may never have happened.
The Shortbox Showcase.
But then again may have. About a father and daughter. I'm Professor Allen.
And I'm Emily.
Who came from Ohio and talked about comics.
Walking Dead.
Tintin.
Black Lightning.
White Tiger. It tells of their rise to glory, when the great guests were yet to be booked.
Let's put it this way, Shogun Warriors wasn't going to win any Eisners.
And the great feats of editing not yet performed.
This is Ultra 7, this is Ultraman Jack, and this Ultraman Taro, and this Ultraman Leo, and this
of how they spoke at length.
This continuity is really the brainchild of nitpicking nerds the world over.
But to be fair, the best kind of confession is the Force confession.
And reviewed in brief tales that explore creatively the bounds of a given character's history.
Red Sun is wonderful with a very strange ending.
Of brilliant creators before their fall from grace. This is the era where Miller is at the height of his creative and artistic powers, and the ability of strong writing to encapsulate and transcend its time.
Flash of Two Earths by Gardner Fox.
This is an imaginary podcast. Aren't they all? Shortbox Showcase is part of the Relatively Geeky family of podcasts. Check us out on the web at relativelygeekypodcast.blogspot.com or search in iTunes for Relatively Geeky or Shortbox Showcase. And remember, we're not experts.
We're just family.
I found the most satisfying part of this book. That the book is generally, I think it's generally enjoyable to read. You mentioned a few points that are kind of funny. You kind of get the badassery of him after he ages, which, you know, it functions as entertainment. But really the most satisfying part of the book for me was the ending, which even so I read it, I would have read it last summer when I bought it. And then I think I read it again like a couple of weeks ago, or well, I guess probably just last week. I finished it for the second time and had forgotten how it ended. That's how memorable it was. But at the same time, like when I did finish the book the second time, I was like, yeah, that's a really good ending. Like it didn't sort of fall into the cliches of the time travel paradox stuff that we get gotten in so many.
He transcended it in the end because it was so unexpected the way it ended, and there's kind of this poignant comment at the very end, which is suitably nebulous. Like we don't really know what he means by it.
It almost seems like it doesn't, like the sentence doesn't finish, right? It's like this.
He mentions something about the truth, but he doesn't say what the truth is.
It's almost like you expect it to be like a comma or a colon, and then the statement of what that unassailable truth is. But it was a really satisfying and kind of a moving ending. Very moving in a way that most of the book wasn't really. But again, not to say that it wasn't a good read. It's a good read, but what else is there?
It's interesting though that you should mention how you had forgotten the ending, because I read it 2 weeks ago and then picked it up again 4 or 5 days ago and was like, oh, wait a second, who was the killer at the end? Like, I couldn't remember what I'd read, literally 10 days before. Because it was almost like a throwaway aspect of it, I guess.
And it kind of is. I think that the actual killer is so uninteresting in who it is. I mean, it's kind of neat how it might actually tie into Jack's actions when he went back to the past. Like there is some kind of tie possibly to that.
Right.
But at the same time, the guy that is actually gonna murder patients is not really important.
Yes. Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
It's kind of I guess it's forgettable. It may be intentionally forgettable because it's not quite like a random break and enter sort of
no, that's right.
burglar
right.
who she stumbles in on, and the guy just breaks her neck. It's not quite that impersonal, but almost that level.
Well,
so yeah,
and it's kind of tied into him not knowing about her past as well. I mean, that it is kind of consequential to that fact.
And it is important that it's not who he actually thought it was the whole time.
Yes.
Yeah. But again, that kind of just goes back to the kind of the character study of Jack as really being self-obsessed and even having the opportunity to go back in time is unable to really accurately kind of figure things out, even though he's going back and actually witnessing a lot of things.
Yeah.
He still misinterprets everything.
Yeah, that's right. But there's an interesting thing too, is that he worshipped her before she died. Then he goes back in time and he discovers this stuff about her, and he does say at one stage, like, I have to face, it's time to face all the stuff I did not want to hear about before. But that doesn't change his perception of her.
Yeah, I was just going to say it doesn't affect him really, does it?
No, but he still feels like, even though he said all this stuff has already happened, I don't need to interfere. I should not interfere. He does interfere.
Of course.
Because he doesn't want anyone, hurting his woman, or he's mortified that anyone would treat her this way, and he is literally, close to murdering a couple of guys back then, and then even earlier in time. Yeah, I don't know what to make of him. Yeah, strange. Okay. Well, let's talk a little about some of the other good aspects of it. There's this kind of Ditko-esque quality to the art, like it's really psychedelic, and sometimes he has these spaz outs that just seem to happen. There seem to be leftovers from the time travel. There's scenes that almost could have been cut, like they don't affect the story in any way, but there's just sometimes a couple of pages of just bonkers hallucinations.
Except for the fact that they foreshadow the ending. Like they do sort of set up that.
Yes.
Whatever it is that happens.
That is true. Yeah, that's right. It would.
But beyond that, it's just kind of. I think reading it, I found that they added a bit of suspense. In the sense that it was like, is he going to, is he going to disintegrate before he can do anything, or how is this going to, it did kind of add something to the suspense of the story. And I think it also kind of led me to think about the tropes of time travel, and like, how is this going to play into whatever trope of time travel science fiction that Clowes is going to use. But and as we mentioned, satisfyingly kind of doesn't.
Yeah.
But so they almost do sort of function as not interludes per se, but well, they're breaks from reality. But I guess that's kind of what they would have been for him as well. He would have been he's ripped out of his present, or where he's ripped out of wherever he is at the time, and it's kind of. And yet it's not like this profound kind of. I don't get like with the Velvet Glove Cast in Iron. There was I got a strong sort of drug trip vibe off of that book.
Right.
Whereas I didn't really with this book, despite the sort of surreal aspects and some of the trippy art. It didn't really feel like drug-induced sort of stuff.
No, I felt like he was just enjoying drawing it.
Yeah.
Like he just wanted to draw some of that like old Doctor Strange kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Weird shapes and melty people and whatever. And
columns of flesh.
Yeah, I just felt like he was having fun with that. The thing I don't know was he having fun writing a time travel story, because his main character says several times, "I'm sick of this sci-fi bullshit." And I was like, did you really want to write this time travel story? Was this... And it's not like, well, I don't know if I should say it, because there is trippy stuff in all his other, I think like, Ghost World and Wilson, some of that other stuff, it's really the exception to the rule for Dan Clowes. His stuff is kind of weird, like Death Ray, does have genre trappings.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. I think it was, there's a payoff on the last page, but, I don't really know where he was going with it, previous to that.
Was there, do you think is there any deeper significance to the issues of mental health? Like, particularly as that relates to patients. I'm not sure that it has enough of a presence throughout the book to really be considered a theme, but it's certainly an important aspect of her character.
Right. It sure is, yeah, for sure. Because doesn't he say something like, I knew she was going to therapy, or I could have guessed she was going to therapy, or something like that. Like, he doesn't seem to... He doesn't know what she's... Like, he doesn't want to know about her past. He doesn't want to know what she's talking about in therapy or why she needs therapy. And she's begging for drugs. Like, she feels like she's going insane because of these trippy things that are happening relating to the time travel, which he's causing. Like, he is causing her mental breakdown. Yeah. Or has caused it by appearing, with a ray gun in her life. And she's like, I'm going out of my mind. And the doctor's like, no, I've seen people going out of their mind, and you're okay. You don't need drugs for this. There was definitely... there is an element there. But I think it's more, again, it's through the prism of how much Jack is kind of wrecking her life in trying to save it. And yet at the end, he does kind of, he saves her physical life, at the cost of her mental health. I'm not sure. There's a crazy thing at the end where he's like, leave with me, like the old Jack. Don't, forget about young Jack. I know way more than him.
So he can't, the writer, he can't escape the paradoxes of time travel, but he doesn't deal with them, right? Like, Jack, as you said, kind of causes a lot of duress to patients by causing all this trippy, inexplicable shit where she thinks she's losing her mind, but she actually isn't, because it is actually stuff that she's witnessed, that, these weird photographs that are two different versions of photos or whatever, that's no, you're not losing your mind. That's part of this paradox that's been created by somebody going back in time. And yet Clowes doesn't really deal with it. He's just kind of leaves it. Yeah, like he's not. Going back to your comment before about does this need to be a science fiction book? It's like he sort of avoids the science fiction as much as possible. With Jack kind of saying, I don't want to be a part of this anymore. And, he meets himself and nothing happens, and yet it can't be avoided that if you're going to write a time travel story, there's stuff you got to deal with.
And there's especially a thing about, his driver's license, which Patience ends up with. She ends up with Future Jack's driver's license, which just has Future Jack's photo pasted over his original driver's license.
Yeah.
And there's something about how when she meets young Jack, she has there's a line, something about like, he wondered how I had his lost life. And like, but young Jack wouldn't have lost his, I don't know, there was a super confusing thing in there.
Yeah.
Which maybe I misread or something, I don't know, but,
yeah.
There was a bit there that was like, I'm not sure. But I think the whole thing about all that is that it's not really, I don't know what you pick this book up off the shelf and are you looking for a science fiction book and it's, it's not really satisfying on that level, except for the payoff in the last page. Are you looking for a Dan Clowes character study? There are others that are better. His.
But this is the latest one. So.
Yeah. But again, it's kind of unsatisfying on that level. But there's a lot to love here. I'm not recommending the book. There's the quality of some of the descriptions of things is really amazing. Like he talks about the town where he lands in 85, and he talks about, God, how did he describe the air was like cancer or something?
Is that back in his hometown or something?
Yeah. He goes back to his hometown. Oh yeah, the shapes made by the electrical wires. It's crazy. It's crazy how it all comes back. All the little bullshit things you forget about. The shapes made by the electrical wires. And the way the air smells like fucking cancer. It's all there in the back of your brain. Even the piss stains in the snow look familiar. And there's so much writing like that throughout that I thought was just great. And like I said, I thought his hard-boiled, tough guy dialogue was funny. I don't know if it was intentionally funny or what, but I loved his bumbling. I loved how much he screwed up, and I loved that he could not help himself from getting back into it. And he kidnaps this guy and ties him up, and he's not intending to kill him. He's just intending to keep him tied up so that he doesn't kill Patience. And then so the guy shows up and kills him anyway. And I just thought all that stuff was great.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of a beautiful whirlwind of chaos.
Yeah.
In some ways, no matter how much power you feel you wield with this time travel technology, you're still kind of floating along at the whim of the universe.
Yeah. And
which is maybe what it's all about anyway.
Yeah, that might be the deeper level of it.
Yeah.
And part of the lack of agency in it. The other thing is, Clowes developed, there was a panel in, what was it, Ice Haven? Was that the one? Or Green Haven? I can't remember what it's called, that one. Where he had a word balloon that was, like, slightly out of the panel, so, like, it was cut off by the panel borders, so you couldn't really see what the person was saying. And,
some of the words were actually cut off.
Yeah, were cut off, and the balloon was cut off. And I think he used it once in that book, and I'd never seen that in a comic book before. And he uses it a lot in this book, and I think it's, I don't know if it's, it's great if there's like if there's a narrative caption over top of it, because it's like Jack doesn't care what people are saying. It's like his monologue is more important than what they're saying. And other times it really, like, even the sound effects are cut off, and it kind of I don't know what the effect is for other readers, or what the intended effect is. It kind of forces you to try to get inside that panel and work out what people are, saying to each other.
Yeah, I thought the one that really struck me is one second time through to 2006, where Patience and Jack, like regular 2006 Jack, are walking down the street, and they're talking about sort of these money problems that sort of came up earlier in the book. And it's like you're coming into the middle of their conversation, and that's kind of the effect that it has. Like the top half of their speech bubbles are cut off, and you only get, so like Patience is saying about to expire.
Yeah, right.
And Jack is saying, figure it out, don't worry.
Yeah.
Like, so you really get the sense that you're kind of coming into the middle of that conversation. And then it actually starts in with Patience's captions, the captions from Patience's point of view. Although it's not really a transition, because previous to that is, I said 2006, I meant 2012. Previous to that is actually a therapy session with Patience, so it's kind of already set up as her perspective. But yeah, that was kind of a neat technique. I think a couple of times, though, I found it was, because it's not really used very much, it's one of those things where it's effective in kind of doing what it wants to do most of the time, but at the same time, it's one of those things that kind of takes you out of the reading a little bit, because it's so unusual in the conventions of comics. But yeah, that was one instance of it that I think it did work, even though it sort of made me kind of stumble in my reading.
Right.
I wanted to ask about the color, because it's striking.
Yeah.
The color in this book is so, it's kind of reminiscent of old comics, except it's obviously not old comics, because the quality, the solidity of all the colors is just so beautiful. But the palette, I guess the palette is kind of well, I'm just looking at the 1985 spread, and it kind of makes me think of 1985 Spider-Man books or whatever. Just in the palette, it's a
I love the 2029 section for the crazy colors.
And his fur shirt or whatever as well. There's some bizarre shit going on there.
Yeah.
His yellow fur shirt, but
but
the palette, like the blue woman with the green robe, and everything is just like pink and purple and yellow, and
it really does pop all over the place. It's great to look at, and like I said, the psychedelic stuff was super fun to look at as well. It was totally cool stuff. And I did like, it did come back a couple of times, was mentioned about how, a person of Patience's social status often gets blamed for the crime. And it was twice, like once when she gets killed, and he says something like, people will blame her, for the kind of guy that she married or whatever. And then later on, when there's that altercation in her house and Adam gets shot, and the cops leave, she says, like, people will just blame me because I'm white trash or whatever. And that's interesting. And I think that kind of ties in with the whole thing about, her life being dominated by these guys that are kind of trying to control her all the time. But anyway, what do we think is the last word on this book?
I think it's a really kind of wonderful comic that sort of tickles a lot of themes without really attacking them. It, in some ways, is, and kind of as we've been talking about, in some ways it's masterfully constructed and I mean paced and written, as you know, there's some really clear indications of Clowes' skill as a storyteller, but also some sort of questionable choices about the, you know, why sci-fi, why time travel, and sort of I don't know, questionable choices, but yeah, like, why he's still there?
No, I agree.
And perhaps that's from the perspective of a sci-fi fan, as you said. We both consume a lot of science fiction, so perhaps for someone coming at it from a different perspective, it would just be like, oh, okay, that's cool.
Yeah. But, yes. Maybe, you know what? Maybe there is that. It kind of reminds me of this Angel Catbird thing, which has come out, this comic book from Margaret Atwood, which Tim found so amateurish that he reviewed it on Critiquing Comics, not Deconstructing Comics.
I know, right?
Which to me was the most amazing thing when I heard about that. I was like, what is going on over there? He's like, yeah.
Well, I don't think either of Tim or Mullally knew who Margaret Atwood was.
Right. Yeah, so I think if you were the kind of person that read a lot of Dan Clowes comics, like if you were a person, like a lot of people who came in on Ghost World, and are only read that type of literature, and this is your first thing where you've read something with ray guns in it, then you might be totally blown away by it. But if you are familiar with this stuff, and I think Clowes, I mean, he's read a lot of old science fiction comics and stuff and should know better. There's something lacking about it for sure. So, I mean, if you got $20 or $30, I can recommend some other Clowes stuff, like Velvet Glove for sure, and some of the other stuff. To me, had a lot more impact. Maybe because it was less diluted.
Patience by Dan Clowes is published by Fantagraphics. You can write us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com or look up Deconstructing Comics on Patreon, Twitter, Tumblr, Facebook, and YouTube. All our social media links can be found on the right sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com. Also, please give us a review on iTunes or Stitcher. Our theme is from bensound.com. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and Mullally and I will critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com, and please try to keep it to about 30 pages. The most recent episode is right behind this show in the podcast feed. This Thursday on To the Bat Poles, we discuss the team-up between the Penguin and Marcia, Queen of Diamonds. Look up To the Bat Poles wherever you find your podcasts or at tothebatpoles.libsyn.com. Then next Monday, Emmett interviews Brian Cremens, author of the book Captain Marvel and the Art of Nostalgia. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.